Thank you for having me. I am dialing in today from all over in Sweden. I actually visited Nepal once, but it was only once, unfortunately, and I'd like to go back someday. I guess sooner or later we will be able to travel again. But for now, I guess we're doing these things remotely, and that works as well. So I wanted to share today about sort of the history of compute in Azure a little bit, because we need to know where we came from and then look at where we are now and then see where might we be heading. So we can sort of, if we have enough data points, we can sort of start making a little trajectory and see the directionality of compute. And from this, hopefully then we can start to conclude, what is the job market like for Azure, for cloud? Where are we going with this? What is happening? And there's going to be, because it's history related, there's going to be some ranting and me trying to remember things. We'll see how that goes. See how it was back then when the cloud was young, because it's not really young anymore. So the history of cloud, the history of compute, what is the job market like? And then, it'll be me trying to remember things. Good. So it's always good to start with XKCD. And so installing the XKCD development environment works a little bit like this. You spin up a VM, you spin up a VM inside of that VM, and then you continue spinning up nested VMs and containers until you get fired. Basically, that's what we're seeing now. It's all about containers, and then it's all about running things, spinning them up, as it were, right? I'm old enough to have seen the IT industry before virtualization, which is, that makes me ancient in these terms. And I don't know how many people are listening today, and I hope that there's a lot of people out there that are thinking about their current careers, their future careers. What are you going to do? Which direction do you have for things? And yeah, it's good to sort of get a little sample from the industry and see where we are. Myself, I am Magnus Mårtensson. You already know that. I was the first person to become an Azure MVP in the Nordic countries. So I've been an Azure MVP for a long time now. I was in the sort of the first batch of MVPs for this platform. And I run my own company called Loftysoft. I'm also, funny enough, something that Microsoft like to call a regional director. So I don't work for Microsoft. I don't have a region, and I don't direct anything. But it means that I'm a very close friend and confidant of Microsoft, and we interact in all kinds of ways. And I kind of take a look at what the world is like outside of Microsoft and help Microsoft with that worldview picture. So send me a nice tweet. My Twitter handle is on the screen there. I love getting tweets, so please do that. Other things that I love is, of course, the global Azure, and now in the virtual incarnation. We should have actually had the next version of the physical global Azure around the world today. Last year it was 326 locations around the world with more than 25,000 people attending, but now it's all virtual. And honestly, it's a little fun though to see. Let's go to the site and see how many. It's 319 sessions going on over these 3 days here with 248 speakers, and I do love to scroll this wonderful list of wonderful heroes of the community that are all presenting and all doing their best to sort of have fun, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic. So let's start quickly there now by going back in time, looking at Azure in the rear view mirror. What happened? Well, in the cloud beginning, there was Amazon. So Amazon kind of founded the whole cloud concept. They figured out that we have so much extra compute that we don't use all the time. Let's try to begin to sell this extra or lease this extra compute. Amazon Web Services started in 2006. That's when they became generally available. And then you start to use their service. But they didn't have a platform service offering. They were renting out their excess VM capacity. A little later, a gentleman named Ray Ozzie he was walking down a stage on a Microsoft conference. This was a PDC conference out of Los Angeles, walking down the stage like this, holding his hands like so. And he said, just kind of laid it out there. He said, so I'd like to announce a new service in the cloud, Windows Azure. That's what it was called initially, Windows. So that was in PDC in 2008. And that was a preview cloud for a while there. And Microsoft Azure, or sorry, Windows Azure became generally available on February 1st, 2010. So it's 10 years ago now that was generally available. Azure is actually 10 years old. So I was really excited. I was there. I went home from this conference in Los Angeles, and I came home really excited. And this was my first presentation that I gave back home when I came home a decade or more than a decade ago, 12 years ago now. I gave this presentation. It says "Utveckla lösningar på Windows Azure med ASP.NET." In Swedish, that means, well, developing solutions on Windows Azure with ASP.NET. So that was my first presentation. And then we were talking about how Windows Azure is the foundation of the Microsoft's cloud platform. We were using the term, it's an operating system for the cloud, because that was sort of the analogy that we had back then. That was how we related to things. And it's evolved a little bit since. For those of us who recall or saw that, this was the official first version of how you could stage a deployment and then hit the little swap button in the middle there and move your staging to production. It was very high tech. And the Azure portal looked like this. It's a while ago now, and it makes me laugh and remember when I see these old slides that I made. So this kind of architectural diagram was the first architecture for Azure. You could have front-end web roles behind a load balancer, and you'd use the number of instances that would correlate to how much compute you needed. There were worker roles in the background, also Windows Server machines that you could send messages to using the storage system. You could enqueue messages and they would be dequeued, and there was compute happening. So it was very, very nice and simple, the first version of Windows Azure. Later, of course, Microsoft dropped the word Windows from the product because they felt it would be maybe a little alienating for people that wanted to run a Linux machine. Because theoretically, a Linux machine in Azure would have been a Windows Azure Linux machine. It would have been really, really confusing. So there was rebranding and all, and nowadays we know it as Azure or just Microsoft Azure, maybe sometimes. So the next question now becomes, in terms of, if you think about platform services and compute, which is what? Is a service in Azure, is it an infrastructure service, an IaaS service? Is it a platform service, or is it a service offering, a software service, software as a service solution? One person who is in the middle of this and who works with this on a daily basis is the Azure CTO, Mark Rusinovich. He works with this all the time, of course. And from 2016 now, it's actually getting old, this quote, but I like it. It just gives us a context, and I can put that in a historical perspective as well. He was talking then about how infrastructure services, IaaS, like compute, storage, and networking, defined the first generation of cloud computing adoption, and how many organizations are increasingly turning to platform services, PaaS, to create and deploy applications more quickly. And he said, I call this the shift from infrastructure to innovation, and it's underway today. So PaaS is the shift from infrastructure to innovation. That was in 2016. Now that's honestly a very modest statement coming from Microsoft, considering that Microsoft was the first cloud platform to have a platform offering. Remember, Amazon only had infrastructure services to begin with, and Microsoft's first compute offering in Azure was a PaaS service. It was actually only later that, of course, Microsoft had to accept that the market requires virtual machines. The market wants to have virtual machines, and we have to give them that offering as well. Honestly, if the market would have been like, yes, platform services, we're going there, then I don't believe that Microsoft would have ever had the VM offering. But of course, you have tons and tons and tons of old data centers, off cloud that people run, and they have VM capacity there. They have knowledge about VM, so we really had to have a VM offering. So generally speaking, of course, I mean, this is not news to anyone, but when you need to run and maintain a virtual machine, that's an IaaS offering. Of course, you can do that in Azure today with Linux and Windows and all the things you want, and your custom images of virtual machines and all the things. So sometimes you need that. Sometimes you cannot for some technical reason. Most of those technical reasons have been removed, but for maybe maintenance reasons, because you don't have the skill set or whatever it is, you may choose to run one or several or even many virtual machines. So that's very common, of course, to still run virtual machines in Azure today. And we're going to actually address one more reason in a little while. But if you can get away with just buying or using it rather than deploying compute instances, then it's a SaaS solution, of course. Those are, for instance, in Azure would be something like a logic app or a function app or something like that. But then if you build your own custom application that you deploy to a compute instance in the cloud, then you have your PaaS solution. And that's not news to anyone, but I just, level setting. So what you want to be able to do is manage your services in Azure. You want to deliver features. You want to create business value. What you typically don't really want to do, because it's not exactly your business, it's just stuff you had to do anyway, is to deploy, take care of the scalability, the availability, and the latency and the life cycle of things. That's the stuff you don't want to do. You don't want to be, sad goatee IT person. You don't want to be that person. You want to be happy blue lipstick guy who is delivering features, delivering value. That's what you really want to do. You don't actually care about scaling a cluster. You care about business value. So how can you run your code or your application or your service or whatever in Azure? Well, I can give you a list. Let's do it. That's a pretty long list. First of all, we can note that the middle part there, Service Fabric and Service Fabric Mesh, not happening so much anymore. Now, I love Service Fabric. It's really good. I have had customers that have built on this platform and really been able to build really good solutions with it. Service Fabric continues to be important for Microsoft because that technology called Service Fabric, you can look it up what this is. It's a platform upon which a lot of Microsoft's own services are running. So SQL Database and Bing Cortana and Service Bus and bunch of Microsoft assets, mega-sized global assets, run on top of technology in Azure data centers that are built on the platform of Service Fabric or a version thereof, which is kind of interesting. So the customer base out in the world are not using Service Fabric very much. So I kind of mostly scratched that off the list. The initial first service that Microsoft had is still available in Azure. It's nowadays called the Azure Cloud Service. So that was this. This was a hosted service when it came out, the first architecture, now known as the Cloud Service. And funny enough, the cloud service is in the platform still. In fact, Microsoft run, and I don't know if they maybe have changed some of that technology, but anyway, they used to run the cloud service themselves, Microsoft, for themselves. And on top of that, they built the Azure App Service, the Kudu engine that we know. Kudu is an open source engine, which is the engine that runs underneath the Azure App Service. And in fact, if you're running Azure Functions today, that runs inside of App Service, inside of Cloud Service. Very interesting. And it's actually Azure Functions is kind of like a version 2 of the technology that was when it first came out was known as Web Jobs. Microsoft came out with Web Jobs, and then Amazon came out with something that was like similar to Web Jobs, but way cooler, which was their Lambda service, very popular, very cool service. And then people inside of Microsoft were like, what? We don't have a Lambda service. Well, we kind of have Web Jobs, but it wasn't good enough because it wasn't pay per use fully all the way. So Microsoft kind of revamped the Web Jobs story and gave us Azure Functions. Now, a cloud service doesn't run in sort of, in its own in limbo somewhere. Of course, that runs on a VM. Of course, you can run your own VMs if you don't want to run a cloud service or a platform service. And then, of course, all the VMs runs on the Windows Hyper-V, on the Azure Windows Hyper-V. So you have this stack of things, and all of the ones except the Hyper-V level are things that you can actually run yourself. So the lower levels are infrastructure services, and then you go higher up, it becomes platform services, and then at the top layer there you get your your function as a service. I don't know if that's really a good concept yet, but where you get your your platform offering without servers or whatever you want to call that. So with all these compute options that you have, there kind of has to be one that is better, right? There has to be a better or worse here. And surely Kubernetes, come on, Kubernetes is awesome. It's superior. It's better than PaaS, isn't it? Well, no, it depends. You're just being a jerk, right? We can chant everyone, right? Fight, 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 fight. There has to be a fight somewhere. Well, if there's any fight, let's throw down between container and function. So containerized versus function as a service. Function as a service is more serverless, and containers is not all that dissimilar. The thing about containers and orchestrators, you have to have your containers, your Docker, what have you, and then on top of that you put an orchestrator, which actually translates to Kubernetes. Kubernetes kind of won the game there. It's the de facto standard for orchestrators. That runs your applications without you having to really manage your own servers. You run inside of a cluster. You have nodes of machines and they run this platform, not at all dissimilar to Service Fabric again, but it's a different technology. And this is the technology that the world really loves. Now, compare that to a function. Function as a service runs your code without you managing your own servers. Notice that I didn't say applications. You are not running applications when you run a function service, okay? So when all you need to run is a few lines of code, then you can get away with using a function. But it's not as clear cut as that. It's not like I'm using that one and I think that is better, I'm never using the other one. When you talk to a gentleman like Brendan Burns, who is one of the co-founders of Kubernetes, and he's now a distinguished engineer at Microsoft, corporate VP. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the titles, but he's pretty awesome, right? So he said, and I quote, "As we move into the future, I'm fully convinced that future Kubernetes clusters will contain a mix of containers running on dedicated machines, as well as bursting into serverless infrastructure." And what does he mean by that? Well, so if you run your own Kubernetes clusters, you're running Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. But if you just run a container and you just have a little thing you want to run and you just fire up a container in Azure, you're running ACI, or the Azure Container Instances. So one makes it so that you run your own cluster. You deploy a scale set of machines. Those machines can be Linux, can be Windows. You deploy your own scale set and you take care of those machines. And on top of those, inside of that node cluster of machines, you will run your cluster, your Kubernetes service, and deploy your application to that. But sometimes you need a lot more compute for a little while. And rather than scaling out to more nodes and bringing more nodes online and into your cluster, you can burst out into temporary compute and use the container instances. So you have maybe a big peak of requirement, you're running a big job or whatever it is that you're doing, you're not running those on your AKS, you're running them on your ACI. So both of those kind of have a place, because only running on ACI is a little brittle and you don't have full control, and even though you might get a good price for it, you can still optimize and get a better price for running your own machines. If you run your own cluster of nodes, and you know, for instance, I'm going to run AKS for a long time, for years, well, then you can go to Microsoft and say, hey, Microsoft, I'm going to lay down the money right now for 12 months or for 36 months and give me a nice big fat discount. And I'm going to run that cluster and I'm going to pay for that with a huge discount. So it's not as clear cut as saying, you know, the serverless is always better, or the, you know, not serverless is always better. It's not as clear cut. There are circumstances for all the things. So the development of serverless container infrastructure, it enables people to begin to forget about the machines entirely. That's where we want to go. And my friend Rocky had this picture posted on his blog. I really like it. So it kind of gives this continuum between the virtual machines on one side, the PaaS or FaaS or whatever you want to call those features on the other side, and then Docker kind of in the middle. Notice how Rocky didn't put Docker as a PaaS service. Because it kind of is and it kind of isn't. It depends on who you are. If you're running your own Docker cluster and your developers are looking at that, they're giving you packages. They're packing things up, putting them in a registry, and those are deployed and run. And from the developer angle, from their perspective, that's a platform service. That's all they need. That's all they see. But from the IT pro side of things, from operations, it's still not that, because you're still maintaining a cluster. Albeit those clusters are run-of-the-mill standard machines that only run Docker. Cool, that's great. That's a really, really effective way of doing things. It's not specialized machine. They're highly generalized machines. Still not a PaaS service. That's an infrastructure service. And if you look at the industry where we are going today, it seems a lot like that arrow to the left there is kind of disappearing. We are moving towards a function land. And of course, the thing about the thing in the middle as well is that you need this orchestrator that you have to run, and it's called Kubernetes, of course. And that needs operations people to run that thing. So from the left of the picture again, IT operations, they care about virtual machines. Application operators, they kind of care about Kubernetes. And then application developers, they don't care about any of that. They just want to have a place to deploy their application. And that was actually true before the cloud as well. So a big challenge is, of course, that you have these walls between IT ops, app ops, and DevOps, and application ops, and then you have, I mentioned DevOps, but what I wanted to say was sort of operations people that kind of run in the middle and try to take care of all of this. How is this working? So what you need to do is kind of elevate your thinking high here and see above these walls, what is it that I need to focus on as a person in this market? How would I position myself? What is my job? You know, where is the job opportunity here to run compute? You know, you can be in IT operations, you can be a very IT focused person and run compute, or you can be an app dev, but how can I create a world where, you know, we get as good as possible and we get the best of all things? So let's talk, you know, for the remaining minutes here about the job market and where I see that people need to actually focus a lot. And if I were a person coming into this industry now, what would I focus on? And maybe if I'm in the middle of my career and I want to know where to go next, maybe I've been working for non-cloud companies. I have experience, but I haven't done any cloud stuff yet. What should I do? So, migrations. I am working with large enterprises, really big ones that have had a massive IT industry, big data centers, and none of those are ignoring cloud anymore. They wanted to, for a long time, maybe say that, hey, we already have our infrastructure, we already have our physical hardware, the networks, everything is cool, we don't need any cloud, but it's undeniable, and even the largest giants are looking at the cloud now. So large companies are moving to the cloud, learning about migrations and migrating applications to the cloud. There are so many flavors in that. You can migrate infrastructure services, you can migrate applications rather, that you pick up the applications if you're more of a developer type, and you learn how to rehost that either in a container, maybe it isn't in a container, maybe it ran on an old VM somewhere. You can go and containerize applications. You can go and redeploy applications to the cloud using platform services like the app service or whatever suits the requirements of your scenario. But in the migration space, there is tons of work, and for a long time, the fraction of work in of compute running in the cloud, I don't recall, was it 10, 15%, 5%? You know, it's in the range. Let's say it's 10%. You know, that's what the cloud is in terms of as a fraction of the total compute. So 9/10 in that case, right, of all compute is not running in the cloud. So imagine this is the biggest IT migration in the history of our industry, and it's been going on for a decade or more, and it continues to go on for probably another decade at least. Hybrid, of course. So in this, there's a lot of networking that comes in here. If you're a networking person and love networking, focus on hybrid. So a lot of companies will have either they're drain piping out their old IT infrastructure on the ground while ramping up using the cloud. It's kind of shifting over from one to the other. That's one option. But also what I see is that a lot of companies will continue to have a lot of stuff on the ground, and they will have services in the cloud, depending on, you know, they have a large portfolio, so not everything will run in either or. Some of them will run in both at the same time. They might have a customer portal up in the cloud. They have some important databases there with customer data. Data gets synchronized, orders get placed, and stuff gets shipped off home to the back order system. The back system that you know, the admin part of things maybe have to remain for bookkeeping purposes on the ground on other servers. And so in the hybrid world, connecting the one with the other in that networking space, there's a lot of work to do, and that's a solid place for you as a network engineer. So take a look at that if that's your poison, that's what you like. Another huge area is in management, and that's actually a place where I have been doing a lot of business as of late. Learning to, or not learning to, scratch that, helping my customers learn to develop for Azure, automate their story in Azure, optimize performance and cost, and secure the whole environment. How should a company be compliant in Azure? And there's lots and more there. So the whole monitoring piece. How do I even monitor my applications in Azure for performance? How do I optimize that I'm not paying too much? I see scenario after scenario where my customers are spending continuously forever, spending more and more. It's kind of like the costs are rolling out of their control, and they need to start pulling it back and finding ways to performance optimize. And how do we develop applications that we are able to monitor in Azure? How do we train our operations to take care of these applications in Azure? In this space, oh my goodness, so much work. So if I were to focus on something, I'm fresh here, I don't know about cloud much, I haven't done much, I would spend some time in this space and be the person in the team who knows how to handle the applications, how to optimize them so that we can deliver a good customer experience that they are happy with. But at the same time, on the other end of that spectrum, we also deliver, we also consume as low an amount of Azure resource as possible so that we can be a company that really has the control of Azure and our spend and our cost. So at the very least, investing in Azure competence, that's at least, I'll give you a 10-year pass for that, at least. It's kind of difficult to know what's beyond 10 years, what's so far out in the horizon that it goes beyond 10 years from now. But look at the investment that Amazon and Google and Microsoft are putting into the cloud, and look at how many companies are moving in that direction for their compute for the future. It is a massive investment, and absolutely for a decade, that's going to be a really, really strong work market in those spaces that I mentioned: migration, hybrid, and the whole management and operation and optimization piece. Those are going to be absolutely wonderful. And I'd like to turn it over to, if there are any questions, I can answer some questions now.
Magnus, so how the job will be affected, just like as you see about this COVID-19, yeah. So lots of small company are just being they are not in the profit, but also they want to move in the cloud. So how can they move into the cloud?
That's a very broad question. So when you're moving to the cloud, what you need to do is begin to learn. And so maybe smaller companies don't have the resources that it would take to actually bring in external experts to give guidance, but that's generally something that I would advise. I'm working in that space myself, obviously, so it's kind of self-serving. But if you don't have the experience and the skill set in-house, consider either hiring someone who does, or just consulting someone who has the experience to give you directions. That's definitely something that I would consider, because this is I wouldn't say that it's a race, but definitely those with the most knowledge here will win and become the most successful. And in that sense, it is a race to actually attain that information. How do I even do this? Where do I begin? If you haven't done it already, I know there are so many companies and so many individuals, workers out there that haven't worked for companies that are doing cloud business. And I know this is a huge challenge for people. How am I breaking in here? Start by thinking about what it is that you want to do in the cloud. You know, there's several technology aspects that I quickly kind of tried to outline, but learn. Go in and study architectures. Go into the learning paths that Microsoft have under Microsoft Learn, and go in and read through those various learning paths and take a look at them and say, oh, I'm attracted to this thing. I like the compute thing. I'm a developer. Or, oh, networking, awesome. I love networking. That's what I really know how to do. I'd like to continue and understand and learn how to become a networker in Azure. How do I learn this? Well, Azure Learn is a really good place for that. I hope that answers a little bit of the question.
Yeah. So yeah, so we haven't got much question, but it was great. So moreover, just talking about the Azure, so lots of AI related stuff has been implemented on there. So what are the new things that we can do with the AI on the Azure?
Oh, well, I'm not much of an AI guy, but definitely this is a space that is super, super important. The things that I see happening here are of course these cognitive services that will help you build your applications, the Q&A bots and other services that are in this portfolio. I would go and make an overview, unless I know already about how many services that are in this platform. It's like 2 handfuls of services in the Microsoft AI portfolio now. I really can't say much about it, but not within this time either. But there's a lot of interesting services there. Just dive in, I would say.
Okay, thanks. And one question from the student I have raised that, so suppose a student who he wants to learn the Azure. So first of all, while signing on the Azure, they require a valid credit card or a Visa card. So is there any bypass of that to learn the Azure?
The compute stuff. Okay, no, not really. I mean, of course you can buy Azure with an invoice as well, right? But typically you would need a credit card to get started. There are some free offerings, but those are mostly for students and things. There are some kind of limited trials that you can get for free, but generally speaking, you would need to register a card for that. But again, students have a nice offering there. If you're still a student, you're at college or wherever you are, can actually apply and get grants that they can distribute to students.
No, okay, thanks. Yeah, and lastly, I have one question. So many many people talks about me that which is the best platform, is AWS is best or is Azure is best. So what is your opinion? Which cloud computing is the best?
The thing is, I'm a fan of Microsoft. I'm a Microsoft fanboy. I use Azure. I've been using Azure. I really always try as hard as I can, and I keep failing to learn more about AWS as well and learn more about the Google App Platform as well. There's always more to learn, and just looking at only, quote unquote, only Azure is a lot just in its own right to try to consider yourself an expert on just that one platform. So I personally love Azure, but I'm not, I think that going back to like the browser wars, which browser was best, Netscape Navigator, or which was it Internet Explorer, and going back to the days when we were fighting over, VB or C# or Java is the best. I think those kinds of battles are kind of childish, if you will. I think we've moved away largely from that. I don't think a lot of people anymore think like that. Obviously, both the Google platform and the Amazon platform and the Azure platform are great platforms, and you can use them to run your enterprise applications, whatever size, whatever compute size you need, and lots of services. They're all great. I prefer to use the Azure platform because that's the one I know. But I wouldn't say that any one of them is better or worse. They're just not exactly the same, but they solve the same problems.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So it depends upon your cost, upon your infrastructure which you want to go, then you can go with those type of cloud computing. Yeah. So we have another question. So can you tell something about the hybrid cloud? So
yeah. So I did mention a little bit there in my slides, just briefly, right? That there is this hybrid cloud thing. So I see again a lot of companies that will run. First of all, they will complete the run of their current infrastructure investment. Maybe they have a contract with an outsourcing partner. Maybe they have their own data center, but they will of course complete and use that until it's used up, because it's an investment that they bought, and that's an important investment for them. But then also, if you look additionally on the whole compliance and data sovereignty and those kinds of questions, it is clear that the future will still hold a lot of compute not in the cloud, more local. Of course, Microsoft and other platforms are opening up their data centers in all kinds of countries around the world. For instance, I'm in Sweden. I'm very excited that Microsoft has purchased land in Sweden, and they have filed building permits for data centers. They haven't publicly disclosed if these data centers will be Azure data centers yet. That's not in the public roadmap. I think they will be, but I'm not able to comment on things that I don't know for sure. But even so, even if the cloud vendors are building their cloud platforms in all kinds of countries, and even if you can run something like Azure Stack, right, where you can take a piece of Azure and run it on your own hardware off the cloud, but it has the same feature set and capabilities, or as many as features as they can put into the Azure Stack version. Even so, you will have a future scenario where you will have non-cloud compute, non-cloud server farms, or application hosting farms that are running either with a company or with other providers local, and you will have the cloud version as well. So that's going to be a strong space for many years to go, now maybe forever, because I don't see a scenario where all compute is always in the cloud. So hybrid if you're a networking person, just get to studying, opening the books and learning about hybrid, how it works with Azure. And I would say, now I'm actually gonna stick out my neck a little bit on that one, because out of the cloud providers, Google, Amazon are companies that are great, that are doing great business. However, they never were the provider for IT services for the local business. Microsoft has been running your servers, Windows has been running on your servers, and they have been involved with making companies' IT business run for decades, literally. And so the company that I believe has the most complete set and the most powerful story when it comes to hybrid, that's, I can probably safely say that that's Azure. Azure has the strongest hybrid story. And I believe that they will work, tremendously hard to keep that advantage and still, in the decades to come, still be the strongest hybrid contender.
Okay, so we'll be taking only 2 questions. The question is from Paspati Nupane. Can you explore opportunities on cloud computing service or outsourcing again? So he means to say that what are the opportunities of cloud computing over outsourcing projects? Might be that.
All right. Yeah. That's a great question. So, right. In a sense, moving your application to a cloud platform, doesn't matter which one, is a form of outsourcing. You're just letting, rather than you hosting and running your own physical hardware, you're just letting someone else run that. It's just somebody else's server. So how is that different from, contacting a large outsourcing vendor who, they've been around for as long as we have had IT infrastructure, these companies that kind of allow you to not have to actually own and maintain the physical hardware, to just rent your compute. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is with that scale, with that investment into that massive scale and strength that these giants have, they can build compute data centers that are way more effective, even if you include something which is, as important today as this whole green, is it environmentally friendly? They can build the most effective data centers ever. And of course, they have to build for an additional capacity, which, in a way, you kind of pay for their extra capacity as well when you're buying their services. But nobody can make it as efficient, cost effective, and as environmentally friendly as these giants, because they're so large and they can win by being the biggest and offering a price point advantage that the local outsourcing operators cannot compete with. That said, again, some compute will have to be in country, right? And so you can't put all compute in another country and all your data in another country. You kind of have to have these local operators still. But I would bet that no one feels pressured in this industry today more than these local operators. It's got to be
so
really,
I'm taking
really
the
brutal.
last question.
Yep.
In terms of big data, what are the advantages of Azure?
In terms of big data?
Yeah.
You mean compared to the other platforms?
Yeah, might be. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, compared to the other platforms, there's a lot of similarities. Really, there is. You don't have to go to. They all offer good services, right? I don't know how to sort of make a complete story of their compete situation. They're trying to build big data support into their platforms because it's the obvious canonical compute resource to just burst into, again, using that word, right? You burst into, we need 5,000 servers for 8 hours, rather than you owning 5,000 servers yourself, you kind of just burst in and buy them for the little time that you need them. And if you look at things such as storage, you have to have a lot of storage for big data. Well, there's no compete point where storage is a winning deal, as a deal breaker for any of these clouds, because storage cost is already pushed down to the bare bottom. It's a race to the bottom. But what I think that, excuse me, that you should look at is capacity and the service offerings that they offer in these platforms. That's what you should take a look at. Are they offering great innovation here? Who is the most innovative? Who is pushing the boundaries? Who is giving us offerings that are, cost effective, powerful, capable? Take a look at those things. And honestly, again, I think that Microsoft is in a really good place here when it comes to being a vendor that has, given us a lot of features and a lot of capabilities. So I think that Microsoft is in a good place here. And again, that would be my bet, but I'm very colored in this sense.
Okay, thank you, Siddharth, for the question. So yeah, so we are wrapping out. With our next speaker on understanding DevOps with Azure by Chandan Gupta Bhagat. So he will be telling on understanding DevOps with Azure. So thank you, Magnus, for your wonderful presentation on the Azure Compute direction and how it affects the job market. So hopefully attendee has got their answer also of the question. And so we'll be presenting our next speaker. So just wait for a.
Yeah, you can send me an email if you want to, if you have any follow-up questions, or send me a tweet or an email, and I will try to help as much as I can. And I really, really hope, thank you for having me. I loved giving this presentation today. And I really, really hope that next time I will be visiting in Nepal instead.
Oh, sure. So just visit Nepal 2021. All will be good at that time.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. Okay.